Hello, welcome to Mike's Mets Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bishota. Happy Friday to you. And it's September. We didn't think we would get here, but it is now officially September, meaning we are near the end of the 2023 MLB season. We still got a little over a month ago, but yeah, we're heading towards it. We are finally nearing the end of this atrocious season for the New York Mets, and I don't want to get negative right off the bat because it's the end of the year, and September is usually a year that you want to feel, you know, find things to be positive about, even if it's been a pretty miserable year overall, and it has been. There's really no denying that. I can't really find a way to really negotiate my way out of that feeling. But what we have here is a team that's headed towards a disappointing year. It's going to be a year of major transitions, and it's now become a year of major controversy. So initially, what we were expecting, rather, was going to be in September. The Mets, gearing up for the playoff hunts. Trying to stay in contention and maybe potentially like going towards a wild card spot. None of that's happening. We're currently in last place. And then the other thing that you're kind of hoping for is, you got the call ups to kind of pay attention to. We have Ronnie Mauricio debuting very soon, and bringing back Brett Beatty and setting up all the AAA guys, and this is something to watch. These are the guys that potentially could be future players for 2024, and it's something to pay attention to. It's something to kind of reinvest your time into, especially if the team has not been performing well. You can pay attention to the young guys, and that is something that we're going to be doing. Unfortunately, we're spending an inordinate amount of time discussing Pete Alonso. And this is not to say that Pete Alonso is not worthy of discussion. I love Pete Alonso. I think he has had a year of ups and downs, and he has unfortunately garnered a lot of criticism, I guess, towards his performance because he is hitting for a lower average than normal. He's definitely taken a step back after what was a very good year in 2022, where he has seemed to kind of mesh his power hitting abilities with also hitting for a pretty solid average. I think batted 270 something last year, and it seemed like we were headed towards something of a similar year initially early in the year. I felt like he was putting his name into the MVP hunts and stuff like that. He's tailed away from that significantly. Part of it is that he's just been prone to heavy streaks, and a large part of that has to be the fact that his protection in this lineup has been largely non-existent. This was always kind of going to be the concern about the lineup, was that the bottom half of it did not really seem to engage a lot in terms of really any kind of protective powers. But people were going to pitch around Pete or not really throw him anything, and that's only gotten worse since they've been jettisoning a lot of players since the trade deadline. So we no longer have Marcana, no longer have a number of other players. So we are now looking at a lineup that's largely bereft of talent, excluding DJ Stewart, who's now become like the new Pete Alonso. DJ Stewart's thrown his name in as like, you need to keep me around as the DH next year, and say goodbye to Daniel Vogelbach. And he's been on an incredible tear in terms of his power hitting, and that was something that apparently was well known in terms of his AAA time. He made the adjustments and has come out of it better. We're hoping the same could be said for some of the other guys that are going to be coming up, particularly Brett Beatty, who the hope is that Beatty has has spent the time in AAA, and he did hit home runs when he was sent down. I believe 5 home runs in like 25 at-bats. So was looking to have re-engaged his power stroke, which is important. I think that was probably the biggest detriment to his success, was the fact that his launch angle was so down this year, and he just seemingly couldn't seem to get himself right in terms of that hitting. And now we have with the hope that he's sort of recommitted to that type of hitting, because if not, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of what we saw from Brett Brady earlier in the year. But going back to Pete Alonso, there's been spectacular amount of controversy surrounding Pete. The reports coming out that the Mets were trying to trade him, or were entertaining trade offers at the deadline because Alonso was not under contract after 2024, and there was the expectation that the Mets were not going to be able to re-sign him for whatever reason, and those reports suddenly increased dramatically in the course of the week. So during this week, reports came out that the Mets were going to try and trade Alonso in the offseason, which surprised a lot of people. It doesn't seem like the Mets were really going to be entertaining that, nor was Pete at any point prior to the season. And then, the Mets are not doing well. All of a sudden, it's, let's trade Pete Alonso also. Let's get him out of here. The decision is hard to fathom. I mean, I understand, keeping a player who is potentially kind of, worth. We'll debate what Pete's contract is worth later in this episode, but I can understand the feeling that you're committing yourself to a player who is a first baseman, plenty of other power hitters available who probably can provide similar production, or you can develop guys like Pete. I understand that kind of feeling. It has not really materialized in terms of the Mets farm system that you can really just develop another Pete Alonso. You don't develop a guy who hits 53 home runs in his rookie year, nor has been a consistent power threat, one of the best power hitters in baseball, maybe the best power hitter in baseball over the last 5 years. So it's hard to fathom why they felt that they could so easily replace him, and that a trade of Alonso, while it would definitely give you, assumingly, good prospects, they traded Justin Verlander and came away got that pretty good. Trading Pete Alonso, should similarly give you a good asking price, and you can probably get something from a farm system that is hopefully well suited to it. But it's really asking a lot for my fans to say, okay, so we're going to trade the guy who is the most popular player on the team by far. There's really no question. There is nobody on remotely near Pete in terms of popularity. You can't just say okay, so this is going to be the Francisco Lindor team. And Lindor is a good guy, and I don't really have any. I just don't have any real major opinions about Lindor. I just feel like he's a strong player, and I think is the kind of guy that you want to keep it on your team going forward, and they have to keep him on the team going forward. But it's not really the same thing as your homegrown first baseman who was Rookie of the Year, and Met fans have latched onto almost immediately, and they were like, "This is the guy who was my dad." My dad and I had this conversation several times over the fact that Alonso was going to be the next Mets captain, and for all of a sudden these reports coming out that he's a potential clubhouse cancer. There's potentially problems with his teammates and coaches and Pete Alonso, and it was such a surprising report to be released that it felt like something was off, and the fact that almost immediately there was the callback from the players. So the players are like, no, we don't actually want that. In fact, we're going to meet with Steve Cohen about making sure that you keep Pete Alonso on this team. That it felt like a throwaway quote that someone in the Mets front office had kind of given to reporters, and they fed into it, and that was what we got. So we have Alonso all of a sudden is a clubhouse cancer. Go with that, and that's the reason why we have to trade him. And it's a good thing that we're trading him because he's gonna kill this team if we leave him on the team. That was the narrative that was being floated around, not by the Mets front office, but was, I think, pretty deliberately leaked by the Mets front office. I don't have any proof of that, but I can read the lines. I can read between the lines of this. That someone in the Mets front office, I don't know who. I want to say Billy Epler, but I have, again, no proof of that, so I won't really say Billy Epler, but I'm sort of leaning towards that. Someone wanted to peek on, and they thought there was a good chance that, trade him away, you have more prospects, and this is your team to go with. now after the enormous blowback to that statement that was released, that really blew up in the Mets' face now because not only were the players and fans both against it, now potentially Steve Cohen is against the idea also because the Mets are planning to re-sign Pete in the offseason. All of a sudden, magically, he's no longer a clubhouse cancer, and they're going to re-sign him. So I feel like this was a very deliberate leak by the Mets front office to sort of weaken Alonso's bargaining position and say like we're going to trade you if because we had that opportunity. But I think everyone's like so against the idea of even like the possibility of Pete being traded away that they may have actually weakened their own bargaining position. Because now, if I was in Pete's camp, I would be like, okay, so actually we're going to call your bluff and be like, okay, try and trade us now. Right now, and we're going to milk as much money out of Steve Cohen as possible. And now let's talk about like what kind of deal Pete's looking at. So there's a couple ways this could go. They could either my assumption is that Pete Alonso wants to be the highest paid first baseman in baseball, and currently, at least in the National League East, that would be Matt Olson. And Matt Olson's contract is pretty large, and is a deal that is definitely doable. I had thought about Alonso's contract, and I put down my prediction. It was what it would take to re-sign Alonso in an earlier episode. You can find that. It's about the McNeil and Alonso potential contract extensions. Now, I was completely off in terms of the McNeil contract extension. I was assuming it was going to be a much larger figure. He signed for what I felt was actually like less money than he was probably worth, but as it turns out, because he's had such a terrible year, that the Mets might have actually gotten a bargain out of it. But I don't know, it's hard to say. So, what could Pete potentially be looking at in terms of a contract? Well, we have Matt Olson as probably the standard bearer right now, because Olson, not including Joey Votto, has the highest overall value in terms of his contract worth. He signed an 8-year deal worth $168 million. That's the most paid to a first baseman in the major leagues. Next up would be Freddie Freeman with $162 million. So the assumption is that Pete's is going to be looking for a contract in that same kind of value, and that he does many of the same things that Matt Olson does, although Olson's obviously having a much better year. The other is average annual value, and average annual value plays out to Freddie Freeman, who has the most. He's making $27 million a year. Behind him, Paul Goldschmidt, $26 million, and then Joey Votto, $22.5 million. But we're not going to count Votto. So we have the assumption that Pete's going to be going in that value. So working with Pete's age, I would say probably he's going to be looking for a long-term deal. He would like to be paid probably into age 36, maybe 37, and you're looking at maybe a 6-year deal, probably worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 million at least. So that's a contract worth of probably $150 million, and if the idea is that Alonso, who is, a guy who can very easily hit 40, 45 home runs a year, every year, you have a guy who is one of the best power hitters in baseball, and acquiring a guy like that would give you a player that's hard to beat. You can't really replicate what Pete does. He's just a natural power hitter, and there's very few in the game who actually hit quite like him. That said, it's a very unlikely chance that Pete ever wins an MVP, and the guys that he is he's going to be looking to kind of like put his name against in terms of how much I'm going to be paid are two former MVPs, so Goldschmidt and Freeman, both former MVPs. Matt Olson, who was an MVP candidate this year, and then you have Pete Alonso, who is probably like a step tier below those guys. Maybe like if it's tier is probably like a bad word. I'm gonna say like if they're like the top 3 first basemen in baseball, Pete's probably somewhere like 5 or 6. Just in terms of production and I don't know overall value to the ball club. And Pete does that very specific thing. He can hit home runs, but it's the question of what else can he do. He's an average first baseman. Sometimes makes good plays, sometimes doesn't, and that's really kind of what you get with Pete Alonso. He's doesn't hit for a very high average. He's never going to hit 300 probably in a season, but you can probably comfortably put him at probably hitting 250 every year. And he's hitting below that right now. So if he's looking for a contract extension, there's very look and say like, okay, so he batted a career low. His OPS is down. Everything's down for him this year, and when you have a player like that, why would you pay him what the MVPs or the MVP candidates are worth? So I would say probably it's 6 years, 150 million is not really out of the realm of possibilities. It's just a matter of why exactly the Mets felt like we don't need to keep this guy around, and or why he was being floated around. And this kind of reeks of the incompetence that you would see in the Wilpon days, where this was like that kind of quote being released about your star player. I was thrown back to 2012 when Fred Wilpon was saying that stuff about David Wright, and he was saying he's a nice guy, he's a good player, he's not like an elite player or whatever the wording of it was. That people were like, this is the guy you're trying to have a dialogue with in terms of extending him, just FYI, you're doing that right now, and you're giving her a public quote about it. And that kind of release was, I was like, did the Wilpons all of a sudden reemerge, and they were told start feeding quotes to the press about what you think Pete Alonso's worth. It was just a really absurd situation, and it was I was like, how is this still happening? How is the Mets front office this dysfunctional that this is still happening? And it just kind of goes to show you what kind of ship is being led here. I think Cohen has certainly endeavored to bring in high quality talent, and he brought in a GM with a reputation as a big game hunter. I think Billy Epler is certainly that. He's definitely gone after high price free agents over his entire career, and he's made a good living doing that. In terms of his qualities as a GM, I think he's a terrible talent evaluator. And there's discussions about is Epler just does Epler just have bad luck? He's sometimes good at evaluating relievers, and I think that's probably Epler's greatest skill is valuing relievers, because he has a higher on average tendency in terms of signing these guys and getting good value out of them than he does positional players or starting pitchers, because he's honestly maybe the worst ever. I was looking through his career as a GM, both as the Los Angeles Angels GM and the Mets GM, and he has a shocking lack of success. I mean, he just strikes out repeatedly, signing guys like Justin Upton when he was in the Angels, and you're like, that's not a good idea. Don't sign that guy. That doesn't really work for your team overall, franchise wise. The same goes, signing Starling Marte to a multi-year deal, signing Max Scherzer to a lot of money when he was near the end of his career, signing Max Scherzer to a lot of money near the end of his career. These are just deals that you're like, it's short-term thinking. He's not a long-term thinker, which is funny because he was, came up as a director of player development of the New York Yankees, and there's a lot of quotes buried. If you go deep enough into Epler's career, that plenty of baseball people thought he was an idiot. I remember reading the Joe Torre book, The Yankee Years, and Torre feeding into Tom Verducci, who wrote that book, basically thought he was an idiot. He called him the quote unquote stats guru, and he had cash in his ear, and he would talk him into signing these guys who were, you're why would you sign that guy? Why would you target him? And he just had he had random success about signing relievers and finding guys for good value that I guess got enough people thinking that he was a smart enough GM or a candidate to be a GM that it could work. And the Los Angeles Angels were an incompetent franchise. They'll actually believe it, but he didn't have he told him to like he would tell Cashman to sign like Bartolo Colon back in like '08, or like they would ask they would go after Keiagawa was probably like the worst example of that. The Epler's greatest hit like in terms of like his signings was acquiring Shohei Ohtani. That was the smartest move that he ever made, was telling telling Angels ownership to like write that guy a check, because he's like a great player and he's a guy who does something very singular. He can pitch and hit. And I'll say this: Epler was right on the money. That guy's going to win an MVP this year, and he already won an MVP previously. So that guy. And if you're going to make one argument for keeping Epler around for another year, which I do not believe should be the case, I really think Epler should go. If Epler can somehow work out a deal with Shohei Ohtani, because he has a relationship with him, because he knows him from when he signed him originally, that's probably the best thing I could say. Like, and I would be like, sign this guy. That's gonna be like your last, like, and then resign. If he can somehow bring Shohei Ohtani to the Mets, it's all worth it, I guess, in terms of Epler. But he has made a staggering amount of like bad decisions in terms of player development, and he just has like no clue in terms of evaluating players. There's a point that I'm like actually kind of concerned about the prospects the Mets like acquired. Like, I'm like, are any of these guys going to work? And we saw sort of a mass exodus in terms of the Mets front office. I say exodus. It was 3 guys that were fired, and there's like indication of like how much it's actually going to do in terms of the Mets. Actually, dumping all these guys, but it's the director of player development, Kevin Howard, the director of pro player evaluation, and the director of performance. 3 guys. They're named so far. Apparently, other high-ranking officials and analysts are said to have been fired also, although their names have not been released as of yet, as far as I know. And we have that right now. Like the Mets are trying to kind of like cut ties with a lot of these guys in the front office, and it seems like Epler is the one who's still has his job for now. But if I think Epler will keep his job, but I think they're going to bring in a new director of president of baseball operations to sort of oversee Epler, and will be the one reporting to Cohen, because I don't think Cohen has really any confidence in what Epler's doing right now, and that's going to be the way the front office is going to shake out. Bottom line is, Pete Alonso being traded would be an absolute gut punch to Met fans who've already been like pretty well like smacked around this year. I mean, like, it was already feeling, people were, as Met fans, already feeling like the antipathy had kind of like faded away towards the franchise, and it was now being directed with like this like sort of like bald-faced anger. Like, everybody was just sort of like being like, oh, my fans, like, now they have like the confidence because their owners writing checks, and your team actually sucks. Like, so you spend all this money, so you guys are just like the Yankees, and all this stuff, all this like narrative that's coming around about the Mets and the Met fans, and you feeling this like already. Now you're sort of like an embarrassment. Now you feel like, oh, you're a Met fan, like, oh, like bad, like your team sucks this year. You're feeling this also. So now what is the result that you want to have? You don't want your hometown first baseman, the guy who's been around since 2019, has been a enormous success in terms of the Mets like farm system, probably one of the greatest farm system developments ever by the Mets in their history, right up there with Darryl Strawberry, Dwight Gooden, and David Wright, and like Jose Reyes. Like they have, like, Alonso is clearly in that echelon of great developed players, the guy who should hopefully retire as a Met. Trading him away would be one of the most insanely stupid things that this front office could do. And if you're trying to create a new era in terms of your franchise, if you're Steve Cohen, you do not do dumb things that nobody wants. trading like Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer, those are things that are like people can kind of get behind because they were just like essentially mercenaries. They were brought in to help the team win a championship. And since the team is not going to win a championship, why keep those guys around? It sucks not to have them, but whatever. They weren't really doing that great for them anyway. Trading Pete Alonso is a whole other story. It is like it would be like trying to trade away David Wright. It really would be, and it's something that I could expect out of the Wilpons. I would not expect it during the Cohen regime, and that's why I'm so surprised that that rumor even got as much traction as it did. And I feel like now it's all hands on deck. You're like, now you have to keep him. You have to keep Alonso, or else it's not gonna be riots. But like, no one's gonna want to come to your 2024 season. Even if they sign Shohei Ohtani, I would be like you traded away Pete Alonso for what? Like why did you do that? I would feel like a real anger towards the franchise that I have not felt in a long time. I felt like disappointment. I felt like real whatever. I felt very blasé about the team at times. I've never felt anger, which is like in my lifetime. I'm happy about it because I've never really been able to be like I'm like pissed off at the franchise. I'm never like that. I've never felt like this franchise sucks. Forget them. I don't want to deal with them anymore. If they did that, I would really feel anger towards them, and I don't want to feel anger towards the Mets. So let's keep Pete Alonso, please, and let's not make the ridiculous decision to trade away a guy who should be a Met for years to come.
Thank you for listening to Mike's Mets podcast. Please be sure to follow us on Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Finally, please also follow the podcast Twitter, which is Mike's Mets Pod, all one word. Appreciate your time and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Let's go, Mets.